Hello, and welcome to this discussion about the Verizon 2020 Data Breach Investigation Report, which is hot off the presses. We call it DBIR, and we're going to talk today in particular about the findings related to the public sector. I'm your host, David Grady, Chief Cybersecurity Evangelist at Verizon. I'm joined today by my colleague, Jim Meehan. Jim is quite experienced when it comes to cybersecurity, and particularly has a lot of experience in government and law enforcement. So, Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about you before we get started talking about the DBIR this year?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Dave. So I came over to Verizon about 1.5 years ago. Currently, I'm a senior manager over global investigations. My job is kind of to work with companies as they go through a data breach investigation. And then I also help align, we have discussions to help align their security control framework and their incident preparedness and then incident response. Prior to that, I had 21 years with the Secret Service. Worked through a number of different areas there where I went from the President's detail to the counter-assault team, worked on some countermeasure type of activities, and I spent about 10 years of my career doing large transnational investigations on data breach scenarios where the Secret Service is obligated to protect the financial infrastructure of the United States. Mm-hmm. So that's how we get involved in that. Aside from that, I also was a U.S. representative on the Five Eyes Enforcement Group for Cybercrime Operations. As part of the G8 Roma Leone Cybercrime Working Group, I have a master's in counterterrorism from National Defense University, and then I went to Carnegie Mellon to get the Chief Information Security Officer Program certification. So as I go and speak to CISOs, I wanted to make sure that I knew exactly what was on their mind, what kind of concerns they had, things along those lines. And doing all these different types of programs, having the investigative part of my career, has really been able to help solidify that type of stuff.
Yeah, well, with your background and experience, we're lucky to have you at Verizon, but we're lucky to have you on this call because, as we said, we're going to look at the data specific to the public sector, which you have a lot of experience with in the DBIR. But before we get to those numbers specific to public sector, I just want to give a little background for folks who may be new to the DBIR. This is the 13th year that Verizon has published the Data Breach Investigation Report. The report is a free report. It's available online. There's a download for it. There's a link here, actually, to the website where you can find it. The report is highly respected and always anticipated because it's data-driven, and every year the data set grows. This year we had 81 countries contributing information from 81 different contributors, information about actual data breaches and about significant security incidents that needed investigation. Verizon created a language for the submission of that information, so it comes in sort of normalized. And every year we look at these incidents and we look at the data breaches and we sort of deconstruct them. And in the report, we explain who the bad guys were and how they did what they did and who their victims were. And when you synthesize all that information, you really get a better understanding of what's more likely to happen to a organization in a particular industry or sector. And that helps an organization really focus its security efforts on the things that are more likely as opposed to the things that are possible. And we think it's really important to use the precious resources that you have for security to try and safeguard against the things that are more likely. And the DBIR gives you that insight. The report, as I said, it's free for download. There's no advertising in there about Verizon services, but it does talk about the patterns over years and years and years. This year, we had close to 4,000 data breaches that we were able to sort of deconstruct and sort of do autopsy on and really see what happened. That's a huge number. It's almost twice as many as we had last year. And the body of insights that we have over the last 13 years is pretty remarkable. The report is written in a very accessible way. It's written for like real people in addition to security folks, and it's a great tool for security folks to use to educate and influence people in an organization. Helps tell a story. It's written for people. You can see here that there's some pretty cool graphics in the report as well. This one shows how over the years certain types of attacks come and go like fashion, and while others are sort of consistent. We see errors being consistent across the board, but malware is high one year and it's low the next year. So the report can give you some interesting insight about the sort of variations. At a high level, as I mentioned, we had 32,000 security incidents to look at this year, which brings, the total of what we have over 13 years to close to 200,000. Of those 3,200 incidents, we had a subset of almost 4,000 confirmed data breaches. And then some of the high-level headlines that we saw here is that in malware attacks, 27% of those consisted of ransomware. And we're going to talk a bit about ransomware today, particularly what that has to do for public sector. We saw that 58% of the data that's been compromised is personal data, highly monetizable personal data. And we also saw that 1 in 5 breaches is caused by errors, which tells you that security is not just a technology, issue. It's also a process issue. And it's a people issue. So there's a lot to learn and infer and take away from this report. We highly encourage, again, that you use the attachments and links section here to find the report. What's new, again, in this report this year is we almost doubled the number of industries that we provide specific information about. So we have a list here that you can see. And public sector is one of those sort of areas that we look at. We're going to talk about today. And the report this year, for the first time, maps the what we look at to a couple of external frameworks, like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which can be very helpful for security teams who are trying to map insight into their programs and understand which controls are best suited to help them mitigate their security concerns. We also did some mapping to the critical security controls from CIS. So there's a lot in the report. And as I said, at the high level, we saw some consistency in different industries around who the threat actors are and the patterns. But for public administration, for the purpose of this call, Jim, I was hoping you could walk our audience through, what we found in the 2020 DBIR relative to public administration.
Sure, absolutely. So as you look at it, the DBIR does a really nice job of breaking down per industry, but not only per industry, the top patterns, the actors, the motives, the data compromise, and the controls. So you can take a quick snapshot of what's going on in your sector, in your industry. And I think one interesting thing is that I talk to CISOs around the country. A lot of times they say they look forward to the report because it also helps them to kind of figure out what their cybersecurity posture is going to be. So as we look at this slide here, we look at the frequency. Again, confirmed data disclosure is when it's guaranteed that something has been exfiltrated from the business. The incident is just where something has happened with the CIA, basically. As you look at your information, was something affected? Yes, it was. Was it exfilled? If it was exfilled, it's a breach. If there's no guarantee it was exfilled, again, it's an incident. So easily to look at, you look at the top patterns. So miscellaneous errors, again, as Dave said, miscellaneous errors, it comes with anybody sending out an email to the wrong email address, anything along those lines. Basically, it's not the hacker that's coming into your business that's stealing stuff. That is something that an employee has made a mistake. Or now, as everybody starting to move to cloud platforms, you're starting to see a lot of errors as people move to the cloud as far as containment, security controls, the implementation of cloud. There's a lot of exposed buckets. There's 3 buckets that are out there, and that would be considered a miscellaneous error.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so miscellaneous includes misconfiguration of cloud security controls, right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. All right.
So web applications. Sorry, Dave?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you want to go on. I'm sorry.
Sorry. So web applications is another incident. So web applications come out quick. They're usually pushed to market rather rapidly. And again, with those, vulnerabilities come along with that. So as the web apps are pushed out, that's another challenge as far as they come out. And then with patching, as you follow up with patching, I think last year they said there's over 6,100 patches that came out. Patching is another huge challenge. As you talk to the criminals, a lot of the things what they do is they go path of least resistance. One of the hackers had said that he sits and basically waits for patches to come out. He'll be inside of a business already, and then once he sees that a patch comes out on some software that they're utilizing, he has 60 to 90 days to use that, whatever that exploit is. He can go after that vulnerability, use his exploit, and then attack the system that way. Key things are to remember is that you know, you don't not only have errors inside your company or wherever you're working, but you also have the attackers, and as they're attacking, you know, their basic plan is to do outside reconnaissance. So they'll research their targets, then they do their initial compromise, they establish their foothold, they escalate their privileges, then they'll do internal reconnaissance. They'll go around systems, making sure not to trip any security flags. But what they do is once they get in, they'll also create backdoors. So if they do get discovered, if they do get kicked out, they have a backdoor so they can get back in. With that, they move laterally. They always want to expand their presence. And then from there, then that's when they'll start exfilling data. But historically, you used to see where it was a smash and grab, where they come in on a weekend, or maybe IT isn't staffed as heavily as during the week. They would go in, steal any kind of information, pull it out, and then move on. The breach gets discovered, and then obviously all the lockdown measures come in. What they have kind of morphed to is they can get a lot more information. They can steal a lot more information as far as exfilling it at a slower pace. So they decided to do what they call a slow bleed, and they get in there and they stay in for a long time. So continuing with the top patterns, everything else represents, so 73% of the breaches are these types of patterns. Who's doing it? So you have your external threat actors, your internal threat actors. And again, internal doesn't always guarantee that it's a criminal. Internal could be somebody does something with a miscellaneous error, and that is considered an internal issue.
Mm-hmm.
With that being said,
the fat finger and the wrong email address, or the fax misdelivered somewhere, or a lost device, or something like that.
Absolutely, lost devices are a big problem a lot of times. And then if they are lost, can they be wiped remotely? All those types of things you have to think of as you're kind of figuring out your security plan. So again, as we go through this, you know, the misconfigurations, the information that's sent inadvertently, things along those lines. The criminal actors, as they're going after these things, as you start to figure out your defensive posture, what you want to figure out is, you know, it's kind of interesting. I'm big in history. Sun Tzu said in 500 BC, if you know yourself, you know your strengths and weaknesses. If you know your enemy, their strengths and weaknesses, you'll know the outcome of 1,000 battles. So with that being said, it's almost the posture you want to take as you look at your defenses. Who's going to come after you? So the top type of adversaries, not including somebody that makes an inadvertent mistake, you're going to have your criminal actors that are going after finance, anything that they can make into finance, and that includes PII, things along those lines. You have your nation-state actor, which historically was a espionage type of crime. As you start to see sanctions being leveled against certain countries that are out there, they have decided to move towards how can they make money. So you're seeing a little bit of a blend of the criminal actors and the nation-state actors using some of the same tactics because they need to get money, and they'll have an army of people basically sitting at computers trying to do data breaches and then monetizing that. So again, you're starting to see a little bit of a blend there. The insider is another issue. You know, somebody that works inside the company that decides to, for whatever reason, become a nefarious actor, and they start taking information from the company and exfilling it. Not too long ago, there was a huge news article about somebody that had done that, and they had access over the cloud provider that was servicing the company, and they were the insider that had the credentials, and they were able to exfil data from that. And the thing is, you start to talk about COVID, you know, a lot of people are talking about the effects of COVID. You know, there's a possibility that insider threat may go up in next year's DBIR. What you start to see is that all the controls that businesses had when they have brick and mortar employees showing up to their brick and mortar buildings, that's kind of gone away now that everybody's working from their home. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be an insider. It could be that the person's using their own computer at home that's already infected with malware. They may have a company computer, but they hook it up to their personal printer, and that printer is a way to access the system. So again, a lot of challenges. And again, criminals are very good at turning on a dime. They move quickly. They take advantage of things. You know, they psychologically want fear, and they want urgency. So you see in a business email compromise, they'll send an internal email where they're saying, hurry up, you have to send this money to this company because we bought 1,000 masks from them to protect our business. And then somebody will do it because they see it's from the CFO, they say it's urgent, and they'll just launch the money right away. So you want to have those checks and balances in there. Kind of the same way that they use ransomware. It's that fear and that urgency. So public administration, ransomware is a big problem. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, before we talk about ransomware, I did want to ask you a question. So you were talking a little bit earlier about how the sort of approach of smash and grab and get out has evolved into more of like slow and low and get in and sort of hide and poke around. The DBIR last year showed that public administration sector has a much harder time than the private sector detecting in a timely manner that they've been compromised, that they've got somebody sneaking around. From your experience, working with government and local agencies and such, why do they have such a hard time, accelerating that detection when you compare it to private sector?
I think part of it is budget. There's usually a limited budget. There's a number of entities within public administration that are vying for a budget. IT talent is limited right now. It's very big businesses will pay a lot more money than for IT people than maybe public administration can afford. So I think there's challenges there. Plus, I think you have a lot of older systems that are still part of the ecosystem that may not have, maybe they're still running, but they shouldn't be running. The inventory of assets isn't getting done as soon as it should be. So there's a lot of exposure. There's a lot of ports that are open that nobody's aware of. And again, this is what the criminals are doing every day. Criminals only have to be lucky once to get in your business, and you have to be 100% on guard every single day. So I think the other challenge that you see is with the criminals. One criminal, when we debriefed him, and that was, some of the fascinating stuff that I had in my old job, we'd be able to arrest some of these criminals and then kind of speak to them and figure out how they did things. One criminal said he Googled everything, and he realizes that most U.S. companies will use NIST as a framework on how to protect their business. So he read NIST. So he said, I know the playbook. I know how people are setting up their security. And then he said, with that, again, if I find a company, he'd call them projects. So he'd have 8 to 10 projects going on at one time. And he would say, I would go after these 8 projects, again, waiting for some patching to come out, moving around. And the criminals do a great job. They're an amazing business. They share information. They create what I call all-star teams. They'll have somebody that can do SQL injection. They'll have somebody that can write cross-scripting, somebody that can do PowerShell scripts. They have somebody else that can do war driving, which is attack on Wi-Fi. So they create these teams, and then they share information, and they share the proceeds of their gains. And then with the proceeds of their gains, they also take that money and they reinvest it. They'll reinvest and they'll buy software, and then they'll figure out vulnerabilities in that software if they know one of the companies that they're in is using that software. A lot of times they buy more computing power with the money that they steal. So it's very well organized, very high level, very talented, capable hackers that are going after these different groups.
Yeah, again, it sounds like it's easier to quantify ROI when you're a bad guy than it is when you're a good guy and you're trying to get more money for your budget.
Absolutely. And that takes to the slide where we're talking about the active motivations. It's financial, espionage. But again, financial is a big thing. It's kind of been the theme for DBIR for a long time. I've been fortunate enough to be involved with the DBIR from the Secret Service perspective from 13 years ago. The interesting thing to me was that as I was interviewing these suspects, or if my team was interviewing these suspects, things they were telling us a year or two in the past would actually flesh out on a DBIR, their trends, their tactics, and their procedures. So it's pretty interesting to see how they would tell us about what they were doing. And then by the time it goes through the system and gets actually reported, and then the stats are gathered, again, what they were saying 2 years ago is being fleshed out on the report here. So, stats are stats, but when you see live that what they were saying comes out in the stats a year or two later is pretty neat to see. And again, with that, it gives you the ability to read the report and again see how the attacks are how they're doing them. Who's going to attack you? Again, as I talk to CISOs around the world, it's, know who's going to attack you, know what tactics they're going to use, because you don't have $1 billion to protect their assets. Obviously, cybersecurity gets expensive. So you got to try and figure out what's the best way to defend yourself. Defense in depth is one of the best ways. You'll have all kinds of endpoints, things along those lines. But if that's defeated, then what's your next step? And then if they are in your business and you discover them, what's your next steps? Tabletops are very important to do. We have the Viper report, which is a great way to kind of prepare yourself before, during, and after an incident. And again, that's like the DBIR. It's something it's free of charge. You could just download it and kind of read through it. And it kind of gives businesses a good idea of how to protect themselves. And again, plan for that worst day. Plan for the day that they are in your business. Plan for the day that you got to figure out if they exfilled, what they exfilled, things along those lines. But again, as we talked to, and I'll pass to you, Dave, but I think we wanted to kind of hit on ransomware as we talk about public administration. 61% of the malware-based incidents. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off. Before we talk about ransomware, though, I did want to just talk a little bit about that Viper report, just for the folks at home. So that's the VIPR report. It's the Verizon Incident Preparedness Readiness Report. You can just use your favorite search engine to find that, or you can go to the Verizon website and find that as well. And to your point, it's a really good report that helps you justify, the time and the energy needed to prepare for, a cyber attack like ransomware, which is a good segue to talking about ransomware. So I want to give it back to you.
Sure. So with ransomware, it's kind of an evolution. It's been around over 15 years probably. So everybody remembers the headlines of NotPetya and WannaCry. More or less has been put out there that those were nation-state attacks. With WannaCry, it was kind of released and it spread all over the place. Not sure of the intention there. Not sure if the adversary actually understood the capabilities of where it was going to go, things along those lines. With NotPetya, it hit in certain parts of Europe. There was one country in particular that they were going after, and then it spread from there. What we started to see is that the criminals look at stuff as just like any business. How much time do I have to put in? How many hours? How many people hours am I putting into this? And then how much is it going to cost me? So a few years back, you can still do it. You could actually go on a criminal forum and you could purchase a malware kit for ransomware for anywhere. Last time I checked, it was like $300 to $500. With that, there's multiple ways to operate it. Either I buy that kit and I move out on my own and implement the whole attack myself, or I can work with one of the criminals that's selling that and I become, for lack of a better term, a franchise for that individual. They'll give me the back-end support. They'll set up servers that will host my attack from where I'm coming from. A lot of times those are in countries that law enforcement are unable to get to. Then they'll launch the attack. Whatever proceeds I get, I'll do anywhere from a 30 to 70 split, 40, 60. It depends on the deal. So the criminals that were creating these malware packages started to look at it, and they're looking at, well, I'm getting $300 here, $500 there, and then whatever comes in as far as the franchise fees. So it's not a lot, but as a big business, ransomware is a big business. Your big upfront costs are basically writing the reliable piece of ransomware that the AV companies can't reverse engineer. And then you have to set up the support infrastructure. So again, as the evolution continued, they started to realize that if they're going to do all this work, they have to make it worth their while. So that's where you're starting to see a lot of businesses getting hit where it's anywhere from like $300,000 payment. So if the criminal can use that fear and urgency psychologically on a company and they get that payout, now they're getting $300,000 versus payments of $300 to $500. With that being said, you look at the time of discovery for a breach, it's gone up, it's shortened up. So we're starting to see where people are realizing breaches a lot quicker than they used to be. So there's two sides to that story. One could be MSSPs that are helping discover them earlier. But the flip side is ransomware, as soon as you get hit with it, you're well aware of that you've been hit with it. So it's basically 1 minute into the attack, you've been attacked. I think one of the things that's kind of missed in a lot of the stories that go out there is when they're doing a ransomware attack, they've been in your system. Remember, we talked about how to recon, how to do a compromise, how to do their foothold, how to escalate their privileges. That's all been done. So they're probably exfilled before anything else is going on, and now you're starting to see that where it's coming out in the news. The criminals were getting payments. Some companies pay, some companies don't pay. So it's extortion, basically. So they have to figure out how to escalate, how to have more fear, more urgency. So now what they've started to do in the last few months is say, we've stolen your information, we've hit you with ransomware, and if you don't pay, we're going to release sensitive information to the public. So that was another way of enticing people to pay. Now the latest, which has kind of occurred in the last 2 months, is they'll say, hey, if you don't pay, we're going to auction off access to your company. And they go on criminal forums, have basically set up auction sites, and they say, hey, we've hit this company with ransomware, we can give you a back door to get inside their business. And it becomes an auction, just like any other auction you'd see. The highest bidder ends up winning access to that business. So again, criminals turn on a dime. They want money. They don't want to spend a lot of time if they don't have to, and they continue to work on what's effective. And if you looked at the stats in the beginning of DBIR, it's a lot of the same stuff, a lot of the same attacks from, like Dave, when you showed that earlier slide, from 2015 to 2020. The top 8 is still the top 8 from 2015. Irregardless, you've gone up and down in a little bit of waves, but it's still the same attack vectors that are working. So they're going to continue to use them. Again, criminals don't want to have to do any extra work, so they're going to use what works.
So, talking about ransomware and talking about the way that that's evolved, which is just terrifying and awful, it's a good segue, I think, to talk about the controls that the report sort of cites as a way for organizations to address these things that, again, the data shows are more likely to happen to them. For public sector, you can see some of the controls here that are being recommended, increasing security awareness and training, right? That can definitely help with the ransomware coming in, wouldn't you say, in terms of the human behavior?
Absolutely. And what I like to do is when I talk to CISOs, the training programs, very important, obviously. A lot of people talk about phishing training for their company. I think sometimes what's missed is sometimes the C-suite and the board, are they involved in that training? Because if I'm an adversary, I'm going to look to not only bombard your company with phishing emails, I'm going to go after the higher level people that probably have access to a lot better information. If I can get to them and I can get some malware on their computer, I don't have to take as many steps if I'm working from an employee that has limited access. If I spearfish the CISO or a CEO or CFO, I'm going to get a lot more access, and the criminals realize that. So again, when you do this security awareness and training, incorporate your whole business into it. And, that should include legal, that should include HR. Everybody that works for your company should be part of that. And with that training and awareness is, what happens if I do click on a link and something weird happens to my computer? How do you report that up? Make sure that's all part of your training and awareness. And again, I think there's going to be a challenge with people moving to working out of their residence, where IT is already stretched thin because of the fact that they're helping set up remote workers. The more remote workers there are, the more access for criminals to go after remote access, things along those lines. But again, training is probably going to take a back seat while all this other stuff is being worked at. I think, it's very important to keep training in the forefront. Aside from all these other tasks, figure out how you can incorporate your training. And again, we've done tabletop exercises with CISOs and these multiple companies. And again, we always emphasize that training and awareness is one of the easiest as far as getting out, pushing the information out, and making sure your employees all understand what's going on. And again, that not only stops the external threat, but it hopefully will help mitigate some of these issues where people are just making internal errors.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, you continue with boundary defense and secure configurations. I think that's one of the neat things about the DBIR this year is to talk about the top controls to help mitigate the problems that each industry is having.
Yeah, no, and we like the fact that we were able to do that mapping. I think it's very helpful. And public sector, as you said, it's not exactly over budgeted when it comes to IT or IT security. And not all of these have to be super expensive. The training and the awareness can be, sort of organic or guerrilla style communication. But as long as people are talking about it, you foster a culture where people are aware of it, their role in security. That can be an easy way to do it. But So we're going to wrap up here in a minute, but we just want to reiterate the fact that you know, the DBIR is a free report available for download. You can find the link here to the resource center that we have for that, and that we break out the information by lots of industries. So we hope that if you are in public sector, whether you be state or local or federal here in the U.S., that you get a copy of this, even if you're not in IT, or if you're in IT and security, use it to communicate with the people outside of your department and help them understand the real risks that they're facing every day. We also want to remind you that you are on the Bright Talk channel, Verizon Bright Talk channel, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. There's a tremendous amount of information available either on demand or scheduled live pertaining to security, but also just how to run your organization in a more efficient way using technology. So thank you for considering signing up for our Bright Talk channel. Jimian, I want to thank you so much for bringing your expertise and time to this webinar. Learned a lot, and your insight is invaluable. And folks, don't forget Verizon puts a DBI out every year, and the team's already working on the next one next year. So high five to that team for putting out such a good product. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you.